Now it's time to prep these good looking black nickel lights. God, these things are pretty. Okay, what we want to do is first show you how to pop the lens cover off and change a bulb. There's a little slot in the lens cover right there. You just stick a screwdriver in there and twist it, and the lens pops off. And then you just push down and twist the bulb, and it comes out, and then push the new one in and twist it. Make sure you watch the slots down inside. One is deeper than the other, and then to allow for the offset pins on the bulb itself. We give you some extra bulbs too. The nice thing about these, they're 1157 standard bulbs. These things have been around forever, so they should be really easy to find in case you run out of the extra ones that we give you. Now be real careful on this. What I did is I took these sleeves that were on the old lights and I laid them next to the tape measure, and it looks like around 5 inches long. So that's how long we're going to cut these wires on the new signal lights. So let's cut these about 5 inches. You can go ahead and lay that one of the sleeves next to the wire and use that as a gauge too when you snip it off. So maybe make it just a tad longer than that little sleeve. Okay, the next thing we want to do is just lay that on the bench like that, and take a knife and just slice lengthwise on that insulation. Then that allows you to open it up and expose these wires. Expose maybe 1.5 inches or so, and then you can snip off that extra insulation. Be careful not to cut the wires. In your kit, we give you two 3-inch long pieces of large heat shrink. So go ahead and slide those over the wires like that. Slide them all the way up to the light itself. And then go ahead and strip about 3/8 of an inch off the end of each of these wires. We give you a cheap crimper stripper in the on the website if you want to purchase one of those, or hopefully you have a little crimper or something will work. These are not super critical because we're going to put some nice quality heat shrink over these that have an adhesive in it, so it'll help hold the wires together. But crimp those the best you can. Go ahead and install the crimpers or the little butt splicers on the end of those 3 wires on each light. And then we'll be back to show you how to finish this up. In your kit, you get about a 12-inch piece of small heat shrink. It looks like this. Go ahead and cut 6 pieces up. They're about 1.5 inches long. And then we're going to slide these over the wires before we connect them. That's really important, before. Now you'll have to follow this closely because what we want to do is match up the colors of the wires. Okay, so we'll start with the blue because that's the keyed power. So when you turn your key on, the light will light up. Okay, now you'll notice I slid the heat shrink over the wire before I crimp it. Strip about 3/8 of an inch off. Slide it in there. And then I'm going to crimp this. Make sure that heat shrink is on there because you can't put it over that connector. Okay, you'll notice I've matched the black to the black with the heat shrink over the ends. Pay close attention to this. The black wire should be the longest if your bike's the same as this one that we're doing. So black to black on both of these. And then what that'll do, that'll leave the purple wire left over. And these are black is the ground, by the way. So those are the ground wires. And then on the flashers, you'll have left over, there'll be a brown and a green. Make sure your light's good because all these wires are pretty dark colored. So we're going to put the brown and the green on the purple. Right now it won't matter because we can switch these when we get them on the bike, so it's not a big deal if they're wrong. So anyway, let's do that last. Okay, I've got all these connected with the heat shrinks in place. Now what we're going to do, we're going to slide the heat shrink up over the connectors, and we want to make sure it covers the connectors really well. We don't want to touch when they're in the sleeving. And I'm going to go ahead and show you how I heat shrink these. We want to be really careful and not heat shrink the end of this big tubing. Okay, I'm going to use a heat gun on the first one. So what I do is I hold that with my fingers like that and hold all the connector or the heat shrink in place, and then go ahead and just rotate around there and get them started. And then work your way up. Like I say, I always keep my hands over this the big heat shrink, and my fingers over that so that it won't get hot. Don't get it so hot that it burns. Keep going around it. This heat shrink has it has adhesive in it, so if you do a good job, there's no way that those connectors should ever come apart. I'll show you how you can do it with a match. I'm not sure it's a cigarette lighter. I'm not sure it's totally ethical to do that, but if you don't have a heat gun, it's a good alternative. I think I'm going to do one wire at a time with the cigarette lighter because I don't want to get the other wires too hot. One thing I do if I use a cigarette lighter, make sure you don't get the flame too close to the wire itself. Keep the flame more on the heat shrink. Kind of go around it. You don't want to leave it in one spot too long or it might burn the wire. Let that cool and then double check, make sure the ends are done well. It looks good. You can go ahead and do the other wires. There again, keep your fingers over this big wire because you don't want it to get, or the big heat shrink, you don't want to get that too hot and have it shrink up there. Okay, once you get these small heat shrink done, then what we're going to do, we're going to slide that large heat shrink down. If it comes out the way mine did, the heat shrink will cover about half of these small heat shrinks. We want to make sure that it has good contact with the wires here. You want it to stick to that because you want this to be a nice solid cable going down there. So go ahead and heat shrink that big heat shrink like that. And hopefully that comes out just right. These are ready to install on the motorcycle. Make sure that your wire goes back here and hugs this bucket. Don't let it loop around any of these cables back here. So it hugs the bucket and goes through the hole. And then go ahead and tighten that up with like a 1/2 inch wrench or a 13 millimeter. You don't need to get it ridiculously tight, but just tighten it up to where these don't rotate. Like I say, don't get too carried away. You don't want to strip them out. And then now we're going to go ahead and hook these wires up and then put the headlight back on. And make sure when you do this that we plug in the headlights. Now we're going to go ahead and plug our wires in. Do the double connectors first. This is the black to the black on the double connector. Or excuse me, that's blue to blue. And then this one's black to black. Make sure when you pop those in there too, they kind of click in place. And try to keep them away from the center as much as you can. I know it's kind of a rat's nest there, but go ahead and do that. And then we want to keep room for this connector here when we plug the light in. So, okay, and then what you should have left over is a single connector, male and female. And what we'll do first, we'll go ahead and plug in just one of them just lightly. Plug it in lightly, and we'll turn the key on and see what happens. Okay, good. Our running lights are on. I'm going to go ahead and hit the switch on the handlebar. I'm going to go to the left side. Okay, there's nothing. I'm going to go to the right side. Okay, so the right side is, so this wire is wrong. So what we want to do, we want to turn the key off first. We want to change that to the other wire. Okay, I've switched those single connectors around the other way, so I plugged the one into the, is basically why I ended up as green into brown and brown into green, but that doesn't matter. As long as when you hit the switch, they go the right direction. So left is left, and right is right. Oh, by the way, I'm going to do a video on how to clean that switch housing on your handlebar there. Mine's stiff, and it's just real easy to pop it apart, clean it, and oil it. Okay, we'll be back to show you how to put the headlight bucket back on. Okay, I finally got this back together. It was kind of a stinker. I don't like these bikes that have these real shallow buckets in the back, because when you put that on there, that connector, the plug that plugs the headlight into the wiring, has to have an area behind it in order for that to go back and seat. So you may have to move those wires around, try to get them out of the center so it'll go in all the way. It may be a little bit of a stinker, but just keep working with it. It'll finally go in there. And then one thing I do whenever I put these screws back in the back side here, I put a little oil on those and make sure that the headlight is seated really well in there before you tighten those up. And then after this is all installed and everything, double check everything, make sure your signal lights work, the headlight works, and everything, and be patient, because with a little bit of finagling, it'll go back together. So anyway, have a good one. Now we're going to go ahead and install these lights on the motorcycle. What you do is you go ahead and feed the wires through the left side of the square opening here on this side. You'll notice that. And then on the right side, we'll do the opposite on this side. And what we're going to do, we're going to go ahead and put the bolt in just like this, the screw. So we've got the lock washer first. Lock washer, and then washer, regular washer. We're going to feed that through like that. And then we're going to take our spacer, and it looks like this. So the large end goes against the bracket like that. Small end will go against the light. And then we'll screw that in there. Be really careful on this. Make sure you don't cross thread those, because these housings are made out of like an alloy type metal, and they might strip, so make sure you be really careful and get that started well. And then we'll be back to show you how to hook all this stuff up.